And just so you know, there's an ice chest full of beers over there that I brought. If you want one, help yourself. Okay, so we're talking today about Drought Proof Texas, which is my call to action and mission that I would like to share with the rest of you. So, what is Drought Proof Texas? Total rehydration of the entire state of Texas. Go back. Okay, total rehydration of the entire state of Texas. And people think I'm insane. But I can't do it all. I actually need your help. So I hope that everything you learned today you can take home with you and use on your own properties or actually wherever you go. Okay, so we basically all we got to do is harvest as much rainfall as possible and store it in the soil. And we can recharge aquifers, revive springs, build high quality soils, and keep our rivers flowing year round. Okay, so I like to start this talk off with a history of flood and drought, briefly, that can remind us about what's about to happen. Okay, so let's go back in time to the 1950s. Was anybody here during the 1950s drought? We got one? Oh my gosh, there's only one left. You made it. Okay, so back in the early to mid 1950s, you may have heard we had a very extreme and oppressive drought, and I'm kind of basing this story off, starting off from the town of Llano, but it could be applied to anywhere around here. So in 1950, the town of Llano received 9 inches of rain, and then the next year they had a 10-inch deficit. And in August of 1952, the Llano River had gone dry, and the city of Llano was required to ship their water in via train car. And this was a time when Lake Travis was at its all-time recorded low on September 6, 1952. Okay, so 3 days later, on September 9th, precipitation finally began to move into the hill country, and they had some gentle showers settle the dust with 2.2 inches of rain. And then by the end of the day, on September 11th, downpours had dropped up to 20 inches of rain in a single day over 8 different counties in the hill country, including Llano, which recorded 16 inches in town. Okay, so obviously this happens here. All right, so this is what we're preparing for. You know, the rest of the speech is just all about what we do when this happens, okay? So the Llano River went from 0 cubic feet per second to 232,000 cubic feet per second in one day, and topped out at 32.6 feet high. And just to give you an idea of the variability of rainfall, in Junction on the Llano River, they went from 15 cubic feet per second to 23 cubic feet per second. So just because you're getting rainfall on one side of the ridge or down in the valley doesn't mean that you're getting it somewhere else. Okay, this is the same flood that reduced the cypress-lined Pedernales River to a wasteland of broken and bent trees. There was nothing left. It was kind of like what happened on the Blanco River down in Beverly. And there used to be this cathedral of cypress trees that had withstood the ages of floods that were just completely gone. And now the banks of the river totally swept clean of all the soil and only limestone left behind. And these areas are fully yet to fully recover. And a farmer in Ty who had a field as fine as any to be found in Gillespie County before the rain, now the field is just gravel and clay because all the topsoil was washed away. Now, I'd be willing to bet that was a tilled field. They were probably getting ready for their fall planting, and then they got hit, and nothing was left. Okay, thank you, Brian. Lake Travis gained 701,000 acre feet of water in a single day, and so that's 57 feet in depth that they gain. Okay, that's 800,000 cubic feet per second. At 7:30 a.m. on September 12th. Okay, that's a lot of water. 800,000. So an acre feet is 330 gallons, 30,000 gallons. So that's how many gallons went in there in one day. Probably full of dirt too, nasty dirt. So a lot of people think that it takes like 100 years for water to soak into the aquifer, which may be true in some places, but here it can happen overnight. So the Texas Board of Water Engineers noted that millions of acre feet flowed into the soil and into underground reservoirs in our aquifers. And one of the wells that they observed gained 7 feet on the morning of September 12th. Okay, next slide. All right, so despite the massive amounts of rainfall, Texas received no relief from the drought. The drought continued for the next 4 years, and October 1952 went down as one of the driest months ever. So Llano, Mason, Blanco, Fredericksburg, all these towns around here reported 0.0 inches of rain for the month. Okay, so this story I got from a book called Flash Floods of Texas by Jonathan Burnett, and it's a great history of all the floods in Texas since the 1900s. So if you're into that kind of history, I suggest checking it out. It's called Flash Floods of Texas. Okay, so what are we experiencing here? You know, like what are we in? This is what we're gonna have to get ready for. Because we're already in the drought, the flood is coming, it's like it could happen tomorrow. Right? Okay. It's not gonna happen. I dare you. Okay, so this is a boom bust cycle that we experience, all right? We have long periods of drought followed by flash flood events, followed again by increasingly severe droughts. Okay, so the drought is exacerbated by heavy soil erosion during the flooding events. Do that one, please. And so the damage that we get from these drought and flood cycles are increasingly limiting our soil's ability to infiltrate water, okay, which leads to worse floods and droughts. All right, and so the two issues are connected, and the problems are the solutions for both. And that's what we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. Okay, so Memorial Day flood, 2015 on the Blanco River. It was estimated that 70% of the water that fell in this valley was instantly lost as runoff. Okay, so most of our waters just like destroyed everything. All right, and that's what we got. Houses flowing down the river and the bridge is gone. So what that is ineffective rainfall. So we're getting the rainfall, but it's not doing anything for us. It ends up down in the Gulf of whatever it's called. And, so even though we only get 30 inches of rain, you know, most of it's lost immediately. Okay. So instead of recharging the aquifers, it's just instantly gone. Next slide. Right. Okay, and so what are the effects of this? Obviously, our riparian areas get destroyed. So if your riparian area doesn't lose all of its soil, you get dumped on by massive amounts of rocks and gravel, and all your swimming holes are getting filled in with basically riprap, right? And you know, all the native plants ripped out, and what happens? You get non-native plants coming up. Nobody likes that. Okay, and you get people dying in these floods, bridges washed away, you know, loss of our natural resources. Okay, so in the cost of billions of dollars in Texas is probably one of the most expensive natural disasters that we have is the floods. Okay, so what do? To mitigate the drought, we must be ready to harvest as much of these big rains as we can. Okay, so during the heavy downpours, we catch it and we store it in the soil as high up in the landscape as possible. Okay, so when water is flowing across the land, if you stop it early on, higher up in the landscape, it's a lot easier to control than once it gets down into the creek, where it becomes channelized and it's just this destructive force that no one can do anything about. All right, so that's why we start working up high. And we can use our hills, which are basically like these big sponges. They're full of fractured rock and holes. And if you fill them with water, then they release that water slowly over time. So the process of slowing, spreading, and sinking rainfall into the hills can mitigate the damages from these floods downstream. Like if we held our water up here in Blanco, maybe Wimberley wouldn't get destroyed. Maybe. So we can basically raise our local water tables. Oh, okay. And so if you go down to the river when it's flowing, you can walk down the stream and basically see, you know, every 100 feet or so, there's water coming out of the side of the hill, right? There's seep springs coming out of these hills. And that's what's keeping the river flowing. Of course, there's big springs that they're also doing a lot of work. But if our hills take longer to drain and the springs take longer to dry, that's because we have saturated them with more effective rainfall. Effective rainfall versus ineffective rainfall. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about landscape rehydration. And so the first thing you learn about is there is no recipe, only a recipe for disaster. Okay, so every land and landowner is different, and the solutions are site-specific. Okay, so context is the most important thing. Every situation must be observed differently. And if you want to find the most cost-effective solution, you have to understand who is managing that property. Okay, so just because I can manage 65 acres with my skills and my financial capabilities doesn't mean somebody else can. And it doesn't mean I can do that on 1,000 acres, right? So everyone is different. Everyone has different skills. And so all the things that I'm going to show you next are just ideas to hopefully get you guys thinking about what you can do with your skills and whatever resources you have on your land and what resources you have financially. Okay? Okay, so the first thing we talk about with landscape rehydration is soil fertility. All right, and so healthy topsoil is one of the things that we probably all have tons of around here, right? So, right, not so much. Okay, well, let's see how we can fix that. All right. Okay, so a healthy topsoil has a high level of organic carbon or organic material in various stages of stability, right? So you got logs and pieces of grass and then you've got microbes in the soil and all this stuff. All right. And so this, so some numbers from the NRCS is 1% of organic matter in your soil holds around 27,000 gallons of water per acre. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how much water that is, 1 inch of rain on an acre is around 27,000 gallons. All right, so if you got 1% organic matter, you're probably good for like 1 inch of rain. And then after that, it's just, you get nothing, right? So if you increase that organic matter in your soil, then you start to increase the amount of inches of rain that you may be able to harvest on your land, right? All right, so if you got your 1 inch, 1% organic matter, that's great. If you have 3% organic matter, then you can up your potential water storage to 81,000 gallons per acre, right? So that's a lot. It's a lot of water per acre. All right, so sounds pretty easy, right? Just up the organic matter and you're good. Okay, so most of our hill country soils have like 1 to 2%, although there are some places with better soil. But I think healthy topsoil has a minimum of 5% organic matter. Okay, so what is this topsoil and how do you get it? All right. So topsoil, and a lot of people don't know this, Topsoil is created when the soil comes into contact with the plant roots. Okay, so you guys have heard of this thing called photosynthesis? Yeah? Okay, good. Plants with the green leaves, okay, they have to be green. Because if they're not green, then they're not doing the photosynthesis. Okay, the plants, they're taking the sunlight and the water and the carbon dioxide. And what they do is they actually split the water molecule. It's amazing. And they exhale the oxygen, which we breathe. And then the remaining hydrogens and carbons are used to create sugars, which the plant uses as food for its own body. Okay, so here's like a cross section of some soil here. All right, so down here is like the subsoil where there's no plant roots, and you can see the difference where the plant roots are interacting with the soil, right? So, you know, that didn't just happen out of nowhere. The plants are doing this. They're creating that topsoil. Without the plants, you don't get that. Next one, please. Okay. Does this look familiar to anybody? Anybody got some? Oh, we do. Okay, yeah. So, okay, what's this black and brown stuff here, right at the surface?
Is it soil?
That's topsoil.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, nobody went out there with like a carpet and just rolled it out and said, here's your soil. Like, no, the plants are interacting with the atmosphere and the geology to create that soil. Okay, so we need more plant roots that are plants that are green doing photosynthesis and coming into contact with the soil. So during the good conditions, the plants will actually produce more sugars than they need. And this excess is known as liquid carbon, or it's also known as root exudates. You may have heard of these. And this root exudates are literally dripping out of the tips of the plant roots. And this is where like a huge party is going on down there in the soil, where you might, where all the microorganisms are feeding off of this sugary root exudate. Okay, so we've got this complex system of symbiosis happening, and in exchange for the sugars from the plant, these little microbes, they're providing minerals and nutrients to the plant that the plant cannot obtain on its own. So it's like an extension of the root system. When that sugar is coming out, and then the plant is actually sucking up these little microorganisms into the tip of the root. It's called rhizophagy. And they dissolve all the little shells, and then sometimes they spit them back out alive. So it's really wild what's going on down there in this mud. Yeah. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so the life cycles and cycling of these microorganisms and the final digestion by fungi creates humus in the soil. So remember I was talking about the different stages of stability of organic matter in the soil. Well, the humus is a very stable and complex mineral and organic molecule that functions as a long-lasting feed for plants. It can last 1,000 years in the soil. Okay, so what is the humus, like what is the purpose of this humus? Okay, and I think that humus is analogous to honey. Right, so the bees are out there collecting pollen, and they're creating honey as an energy storage over the winter, for use as needed. And then the plants are kind of doing the same thing. They're creating the soil conditions where there's minerals and nutrients available through the humus, through the life cycles of microorganisms. And so that's a long-lasting feed that they can access during times of drought or stress. Make sense? Okay, so the idea is we can increase our soil's capacity to hold water simply by having as many green plants photosynthesizing for as long as possible during the year. Okay, so, all right, you listening?
Yeah.
Number one priority is to achieve 100% ground cover 100% of the time. And the bare soil is public enemy number one. Okay, now obviously we can't cover all of the soil with green plants all the time. But I think in our human managed areas where we live and manage, we should be able to accomplish this. Okay, has anyone ever heard of Del Winiger? Del Winiger, the author from the Explorers, Texas. Is anyone interested in Texas natural history? Yeah. So Del Winiger, he wrote some books called The Explorers, Texas. There's 2 volumes, and they're very good. It's non-biased accounting of what the explorers saw when they came to Texas, hundreds of years ago. Del Winiger said that the entire state of Texas had lost 6 feet of topsoil before the year 1860. Okay, so it's vitally important to our ecosystem to start the healing process and use our human strength and ingenuity and organizational skill to reverse the downward slide. Okay, so just briefly, what are the things that destroy soil fertility? These could be pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, chemical fertilizers, tillage, overgrazing, continuous grazing, clear cutting the forest, erosion, fire. Okay, you get the picture. These are all tools that we use when managing the landscape. I'm not saying that you can't use any of these, but it is going to have an effect on soil fertility, so you might want to plan in advance to counteract that. Any questions on those? Any disputes? Well, let's carry on then. Okay, so we're talking about landscape rehydration. This is the real stuff right here. And we're going to start at the hilltops and work our way down into the lowlands. Because why? Because it's easier to control the water up there than it is down low. Okay, does anybody recognize this photo here? Every day. Somebody probably have some similar. Yeah, we call that the Caliche moonscape. All right, so it's like 90% bare soil. You got like maybe, there's nothing there. It's a few scrubby cedars. These tiny cedar trees are probably like 500 years old. They just don't grow. Okay, so in this case, what we did, this is like a big, long, level terrace. We built this, what I call a soil and water conservation terrace. That's where you dig out the little basin and then you make a berm on the downhill side. And it's level, so it catches water. So there it is, catching water. That's me. Back when I was a younger man. And so what we did, back please, okay. Okay, so we did that, and it's just a bunch of bare soil, right? So we covered it up with seed and compost and some mulch, and then within a year, Brian, okay, it's like this.
Stand a little bit farther.
Okay, so you can see here, there's a bunch of tree cages, right? You see the little guy over there? So the deer is eating the deer is driving the ecological succession here. Okay, so you have to protect anything you're planting. So we use the tree cages to protect our trees that we planted, and those are all mostly native trees. And you also see that there's a bunch of like cut brush laying on the ground on that berm. Okay, and that's also to keep the deer off, because the deer will just come in and rip out all the little seedlings that come up, because they're starving, right? So if you put the brush on there, it helps a lot. And I want to thank my wife, Eleanor, wherever she is, for inspiring this brush coverings. Good job. Okay. So yeah, so the caliche can grow stuff. It's just dry, right? And there's a lot of nice native plants that like it. Next slide, please. Okay, so what this is the same terrace, but this is just showing like some of like a mulch of rocks. So water is flowing through here and it flows past those rocks. And whatever is the water is carrying, little pieces of dirt and plant debris get caught in there and it slows down the water, right? So rocks on contour. You're probably not a fancy excavator operator, right? Like me. So you probably got a bunch of rocks laying around, right? So maybe you just use those. Okay, next. Who's that? David Bamberger. You know, they've got a bunch of these rock berms over there. Okay, I think they use volunteers for this, but
Sure did.
if you're really excited, you can move 1 rock per day, or 10 rocks per day, and then a year later, all of a sudden, all your rocks are moving. You know, so all you're doing is cleaning up all the rocks that are laying around tripping you, and you just consolidate them into lines on contour, perpendicular to the flow of water. So you're just slowing down the water, and then that allows native plants to grow. Pretty easy, right? Okay, this is a picture from one of our attendees here, out in Llano. So I built this. This is called a 1 rock dam. So this is an upland drainage area where there's probably like, I don't know, 50 or so acres, something like that, draining through here. And there's just a bunch of rocks laying around. This is in the granity areas. And so we pick up all the rocks and we build little rock berms or dams across the drainage. All right, and it's only 1 rock tall. All right, so as soon as you start stacking the rocks on top of each other, the water just knocks them over. So these are only 1 rock tall, and then behind the big rocks on the uphill side, you stack smaller rocks down descending. And because I have an excavator, I can dig out a little pool there. And this is what it looks like after rains. Okay, so you're just taking the rocks that are laying around, messing you up already, and using them, putting them to work for you. And you know, this makes your land more walkable, more mowable, more drivable. So you're just cleaning up your land, cleaning up the messes, and using the rocks for something productive. Next one, please. Okay, this one's great. The last one was a 1 rock dam, ORD. This one is a beaver dam analog, BDA. Okay, BDA. All right. So all this is there's just a bunch of dead trees. So this is kind of like by a fence. You know, they go in, they build the fence, and there's also all these trees cleared out by the fence, right? You got all these dead trees laying around. It's a mess. So you clean up the dead branches and trees, and you find and what else comes underneath fences? A bunch of water sometimes, right? So just downhill of that, you can use all those branches and trees that are already dead and build these basically brush berms that intercept the water as it's flowing downhill. Now it's not gonna like back up a bunch of water like a dam, okay, or like a beaver dam might. But it is going to catch a bunch of sediment and debris, and you would be surprised. I'm sure you've probably seen walking around in the forest where, you know, water basically washing over a tree that fell in the drainage, and it's just covered in leaves and cedar needles, right? So you're just doing that intentionally, and you're cleaning up your property. You're cleaning up your brush piles, cleaning up all the messes, and using that stuff to do soil and water conservation. Next slide. Okay, so this is basically the same thing, but with stumps. Okay, has anybody got a big useless pile of stumps laying around? What do you do with those? You know, it's like, yeah, you can leave it there, or you can use those stumps and build a stump dam, which is basically a beaver dam made out of stumps. Okay, and this is in upland drainages, okay? I'm not talking about building stump dams across the Blanco River, okay? This is like, you know, context is important, right? You have to use your discernment to figure out what to do here. All right, so, you know, water is flowing downhill, you know, pretty high up on the hill. and we just get rid of the stump pile and use it to catch water. Okay, next one. And this is the same photo, but looking downhill. All right, so you can see we're pretty high up in the landscape here. And there's our stumps. I built these with the mini excavator with the thumb. Okay, next one, please. Okay, has anybody got any logs laying around? Logs. Yeah, so this is just logs on contour. All right, anybody can do this stuff, all right? The water comes down the hill. You know, you put your log burns in the way of the water, and it catches leaves, it catches dirt, and now you're able to grow some plants more easily there. Next one, please. Okay, that's just a different angle of log burns on contour. Okay, here's so this photo shows it's kind of a combo where you've got the log brush burns on contour, and then downhill of that we built one of the soil and water conservation terraces. That one we built by hand. Yeah, that was hard work. I don't do that anymore. But that terrace is basically protecting a road. So there's water coming downhill, it's washing out the road. So we catch the water and slow it down, and then the water flows through a spillway around the road. Okay, and you notice it's all green. Okay, so this photo was taken in November, and we did this work in October. All right, so go back one. This is the same site. Same site. Okay, so go back again. Or no, forward. Forward. Yeah. So, you know, what we did is basically we applied some annual rye. It's like the cheapest seed you can get. It's just like easy, quick green cover. Okay, so now we did all this other stuff, but we're doing some seeding, and now you're doing photosynthesis during the cool season. Okay, so you're doing photosynthesis during the warm season, but then everything goes dormant. Now we're extending the time that we're doing photosynthesis, and we're feeding the soil throughout the winter as well. All right? Okay, so this photo illustrates an example of what we call sheet mulch. Okay, mulching. All right, so over here, you've got the area that's just like bare soil, right? And then over here, it's covered with the mulch. All right, so just imagine it's like May 15th, 2015. Okay, and there's just huge droplets of water coming out of the sky like this. And they're just like smashing into the ground. Okay, so what happens when those raindrops are hitting the ground in this bare soil? They're changing colors from clear to, in this case, white. And that's erosion happening immediately as soon as water hits the ground. So that's why it's important to have plants, green plants, and something covering the ground, so that when these big rainstorms happen, you don't just have instant erosion as soon as water's hitting the ground. So in this example, the mulch, which this is a straw mulch, is protecting the ground and keeping it cool and moist. And there's seed in there that comes up too. So easy thing, easy, anyone can do that. Cover up the ground with some mulch, not too thick, just like a nice skin. Okay. Okay, so here is an example of a small upland pond. Okay, so in this case, water comes off the road and was causing erosion down the hill. So we built a little dam, and it doesn't hold water that well, but it catches like 100,000 gallons of water every time we get big rains. And it slowly seeps into the ground. And dogs love them. Okay, so here's another example of a small upland pond, kind of this little guy in the middle. So that one catches like 13 acres of of land that runs off. Okay, and it's kind of overbuilt, and it's never overflowed since I've lived there for like 10 years. Okay, so that has caught all the stormwater runoff. All right, and what's right down below it? It's this agricultural area. So you can use small dams and lakes appropriately to catch a bunch of water and keep it on your property where it belongs. That's your water. Don't let it go. Right, next one, please. Okay, so now we're moving down off of the hillsides and back down into the lower lands where there's less rocks and more soil. Okay, so what do you do if you got something like that? Anybody got a nice land like that? Nobody? Oh, just you? Okay. A little bit. Okay, anybody know what this is? That is called a no-till seed drill. Okay, so this is cool. You pull it behind the tractor. It's got these little pizza wheel cutter things. They're called coulters in the front, and they open up a little slice of soil like that. And then behind there is the seed box, and there's a tube that drops down the seeds into the little slice. And then these wheels back here close it back up. So it's pretty cool because you're doing less time on the tractor and less passes over the field, and you can plant without having to disrupt the ground cover that's already there. So remember I was talking about that field, as fine as any to be found in Gillespie County, it's not so much anymore. Well, now you can plant without worrying about getting caught by a huge rainstorm in the fall or something, where all of a sudden you tilled, you were trying to do the right thing by planting stuff, but then you got screwed, right? So this is great, no-till seed drill. If you want to buy me one. Any takers? Okay, please. Okay, so this is another example of the one rock dam. Okay, so you can do these in the lowlands as well in the uplands. A lot of times in these big fields, in between the big fields, you have drainages that are basically channel lines. And so, a lot of the fields have big rocks laying around. And so one thing you can do that doesn't really bother anybody is clean up all those rocks, right? So you go around cleaning up the rocks, and then you can make these. Now these are big rocks. These are they're like this. You can't really tell, but they're big. Okay, so that's what I used to build it, and you plant some seed on it, and it catches water, so it greens up really fast. Next slide. Okay, somebody out here might recognize this thing.
Key lime.
Exactly, the key lime pie. No, I'm just kidding. It's a key lime cloud. Not key lime pie. Okay, so this thing you can see, you drag it behind like a farm tractor, and it's got these big ripper claws on the back of it, kind of like a bulldozer has on the back of a bulldozer. So the idea here is you drag this behind the tractor, and it's not a conventional plow. So a conventional plow turns the soil over. This doesn't do that. It relieves the compaction from underneath and breaks it up, and you might get like a little mound, but the ground cover stays there. Okay, so we use the keyline plow on a pattern for soil and water conservation. Okay, so the blue arrow is showing you how water is flowing across the land, and the brown lines are illustrating, like a pattern that you can use to slow the water down. So you're just imagine you're cutting these ribs through the soil, and that's going to let water and air down in. And pretty simple. This is a pattern I did, and then I ended up just making straight lines because I'm very linear, straight-minded, and it's easier to use tractors with straight lines and stuff. So, okay, so here's kind of what we did. All right, so our field was like this really compacted hay field. They've been making hay in there for 40 years or whatever, and so the ground was really hard, like a brick. And you couldn't break the clods with a rock bar. I mean, it was really hard. So what we did, we drug this ripper through the field, and it was so hard, we only got like 6 inches deep, right? And so we got 6 inches deep and we planted right after that. And so what you get is roots penetrating into the soil a little bit deeper and air and water going into the soil, all right? So what happens when you get roots in contact with the soil? You get the topsoil, all right? All right, so the next time we did it, we were able to get like 14 inches deep. Okay, so the soil softened up a lot. And we have actually a real soil down there, so there's not too many rocks. But you can see what happens. You start to get more root contact with the soil deeper and deeper, and you're getting air and water into the soil. So even the microbes require air and water to survive. All right, and we only did it one more time, but the next time we were able to drag that thing like 20 inches deep. About a year. Yeah, so we do it in the fall because my favorite time to plant is in the fall. So we use, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you can see you're not just expanding the topsoil in the top 6 inches. You can go down too. You know, like what are the exponential effects of that? Right? All right, next one, please. Okay, so these are cover crops, cool season cover crops. Basically, you dump all the seeds in a wheelbarrow and you mix them up. And when we first did this, we were planting like, probably like 30 different varieties of seed. There's like turnips and radish, and collards and oats and rye and just all this great stuff. And it was great, but the deer are very hungry, and they pretty much ate it. They ate a lot of the stuff we planted, which is great. You're feeding the deer, that's fine. So this is kind of what it looks like when it's mixed up. All right, so but we basically, you start to figure out which ones are going to live and survive the deer. So the ones we use now, the basic ones that are always pretty reliable are the annual rye and the oats. Oats is a really good one, and sweet clover, which is a biennial, and sometimes the triticale can do really well. I've seen some really great results with that. But yeah, there's like flax in there. It's pretty cool. Okay, and so we do that for a couple of years, right? You're trying to get the photosynthesis happening throughout the year, right? And so I like to do that. I like to add the cover crops because they're cheap and easy. And if they die, well, it doesn't matter because you only spent like $20 for a 50-pound bag or whatever. It's no big deal. All right, these are way more expensive. Okay, so this is products from Native American Seed Company, which I really love. Great company, great packaging, really good products, but it's very expensive. So you need to I think, do some preparation work, for a couple of years, trying to get the soil healthier and, trying to harvest some water and making conditions more prime for this more prime seed. Okay, so I think we have a lot more success like that. And the cover crops are great because it's like instant green, so I really suggest in the fall, September and October, but you can plant them throughout the winter. The oats and rye you can plant anytime. Okay, so another tool that we have is grazing management. How many cowboys we got in here? Couple? Okay. Yeah, sort of. Okay, so one of my mentors, where I learned from, Jimmy Elizondo, they're doing regenerative grazing, right? You probably have heard about this. It's like a lifetime, passion of work, right? This is not something you do in your off time, when you sort of feel like it. This is lifestyle, okay? But it's very powerful. So they're using adaptive genetics. So animals that have heat tolerance and parasite resistance. Okay, it's super important because if you're doing regenerative grazing, you're kind of pushing the animals a little bit harder than you would just like a regular conventional management. So you need something tough. And they're doing something called non-selective grazing. So, okay, so selective grazing is what happens when you turn out the cows into a huge pasture and they stay there for a year. And what they do is they go and they select their favorite plants, right? That's what the cow wants to do. They want to go get the favorite grasses and they eat those first, right? And then they get the second ones. The second favorite gets eaten next. And then the next one's all the way down until it's just the plants that nothing eats. Okay, so that's where you get overgrazing. Okay, so non-selective grazing is where you have the animals all in a smaller area for a smaller amount of time, and they eat everything, and then they move on, and then they don't come back until that area is fully recovered. So it's pretty cool. They're managing for soil fertility. And something easy that anyone, and I like to mention this because I see a lot of skinny cows running around out there in the winter. Proper protein supplementation can be a really great way to help keep animals healthy during the winter because they need a certain amount of protein every single day. So if they're just eating all this fiber, like dry grass, then they just lay down and their stomach gets hot and they don't eat anymore. Okay, so if they've got a little bit of protein every day, that keeps their rumen working. All right. So it's really high density, a lot of animal weight per acre with frequent moves. Some people are moving them like 4 times a day. So high level of management, it's really powerful, but maybe not for everybody. Okay, next please. Okay, so here's a project that I did back in 2016. And I got invited to this EPA stormwater competition. So it was like green infrastructure, low impact development. I was competing against some city planners and architects and ecologists, biologists, and across five state region. And there was some engineers there as well. And so here's what we started out with. It's a small farm, a bunch of bare soil. We built some terraces, and we put a bunch of seed out. So here we go. I was there digging back then with the little excavator, built all these berms. And then that photo kind of shows, how it catches the water, and we put the mulch, and now plants are growing. And then boom, like a year later, it's like wildflower explosion. Okay, so they have dogs. Dogs help keep the deer away. All right, so they have way more success with their wildflowers than a lot of people because of the dog was helping. And so in between these little alleyways between the terraces, they were moving some chickens around with those little chicken tractors, right? And they're getting eggs and chicken meat. They also had some bees, and they were trying some pigs out there, but that didn't work out too good. They moved the pigs away because the pigs are just aggressive. Yeah. Okay, so we had a really good a community event there with like 40 people where we installed irrigation and planted 100 trees and built some fence and covered the whole property in mulch. And so I kind of I was reading their criteria of how to win, and so I just like checked all the boxes, and so I won. So we were the best. And 5 state region, like I said, against all the engineers and everything, they had nothing on us. So obviously this stuff really works, and this property hasn't had stormwater runoff since we did this. It's awesome. Yeah. So all the water on their property has soaked in, and it's pretty cool. Okay, so here's the final exam. We are right on time. Okay, so this is a Bermuda grass field. This is beautiful. Look at them. nice and green, nice tight plant spacing there. Okay, is that perfect? Maybe not. Some depends on who you are. But okay, go to the next one. Now look at this one. Okay, bare field ick. Exactly. It's naked and it's running a fever and it's bleeding out. Okay. So which one of these do you want to have whenever you get 20-inch rainfall in a day?
The green ground.
Okay. Go back to the other one. That one, right? Which one is doing photosynthesis and building microbes and humus in the soil? Okay, so what happens? What happens when you do get 20 inches of rain on this thing? Yeah, if my neighbor's doing that, I catch all his soil. Okay, so you can be the winner. You can be the winner. Okay, you catch their soil, right? Now it's yours, and they can do nothing about it. They didn't want it. Okay, so this next one's a little. I don't want to step on somebody's toes over here. Okay, so here's this one. Now this is just a random photo off the internet. Okay, I don't know whose property this is anymore. Okay, go to the next one. And then this one, this one right here is just a forest full of cedar trees, for example. Let's just say they're all cedar trees. Now, is that perfect?
No, but it's got water.
No, it's not. It's not perfect, maybe. But which one of these do you want when you have 20 inches of rain in a single day?
Right there.
Right, now go back to the. Okay, so I go to a lot of places like this where, you know, if you stand on the landscape and you're looking out, you know, like this, it looks like there's a lot of grass if you're looking from the side. But if you look straight down at your feet, or if you look from an overhead image satellite, it's like 90% bare soil. Okay, so when you do get 20-inch rainfall, it could be catastrophic in some of these areas. This is when you start to get huge erosional gullies, and this is where all the rocks come from that fill in your creek. Okay, so if you go to the next one, go to a lot of now this, you know, if you think about this like an engineer, right? An engineer is not planning for 1 or 2 inches of rainfall, right? This is not what they plan for. They're planning for the maximum 24-hour rainfall event. And it's coming. You're going to get 20 inches of rain or more, 24 inches, 30 inches in a day. Okay, you might want those trees there protecting your land when that happens. And of course, there's other benefits. You get shade and wind protection. You guys love wind? I mean, how much wind can you handle? I'm done with it. Having enough wind already. All right, so I'm not saying you can't clear cedar trees. I've cleared just as many cedar trees as anybody in here. Promise. Okay, but you know, if you do that, maybe you use their bodies to do erosion control. Or maybe you leave some of them and you try to create more of a canopy forest so that you maintain, because this is ground cover. Okay, if you're looking down from above, ground's covered. All right, so you might want those trees there. Just a suggestion. Next slide, please. And that's the whole presentation. My last words are: I hope that you guys go out here and do this stuff everywhere you go, because that's what I do. If I go to the Guadalupe River, you know, I'm filling in all of the kayakers' holes with rocks, so that they have to drag their canoes around. That was me. But you raise the water like 6 inches. I mean, that's like hundreds of thousands of gallons that you're storing in the banks of the river, right? So I'm doing that everywhere I go. I think you guys should do that as well. Vigilante water harvesting is recommended. One more thing, there is some tree legislation happening, and if anyone has any questions about that, wants to get in touch with Elizabeth McGreevy, raise your hand. About getting in touch with representatives about that. And other than that, is there any questions? Or